Hello, my name is David Bryan, and this is Curiosity Invited, a podcast inspired by endless curiosity. Tune in for an open-minded conversation about interesting and important things. Well, welcome everybody to Curiosity Invited. I'm David Bryan, and I am very pleased that I get the opportunity today to speak to Stephen Taylor. That name may or may not be familiar to you, but it should be. And let me do the boring part first, which is to read some of his bio, and then we'll take off. So this is my least favorite thing to do, is to read aloud, but Stephen James Taylor. Wait, that just makes me want to ask that question. Was James Taylor, did your parents name you because James Taylor was James Taylor?
No, that was my dad's name, James Taylor.
Stephen James.
And that being said, I actually worked for James Taylor once. I did some string arrangements for him.
Oh, fabulous.
And I told him the joke that I said, I always tell people that James Taylor put me through college. He thought it was funny.
So Stephen James Taylor has a unique musical identity. His style has been called Afrofuturistic, which we'll talk about in a second, as it represents a blend of classical, rock, blues, gospel, world music, homemade instruments, and avant-garde. That is a range. His past projects include, and I am not going to read all of these things because there's so many. He has been doing this for many years, but his past projects include scoring Richard Tan's 2020 Amazon film Chemical Hearts, music for the Star Wars Cantina at Disneyland's Classical Edge, which is phenomenal. The first microtonal music ever in rotation at Disneyland. We'll talk about microtones shortly. PBS documentary for I'm not going to read all these things. Howard Hill, Maya Angelou, and I Still Rise. So he's been scoring film, TV projects for years. Let's see, a couple that jumped out at me that I wanted to make sure to mention. Most of the films directed by Academy Award winner Charles Burnett, including To Sleep with Anger and the blues documentary Warming by the Devil's Fire, produced by Martin Scorsese. He's composed scores for many of Robert Townsend's films, such as the making of the Five Heartbeats in 2017, of Boys and Men in 2008, Carmen, a hip opera, which is cool, 2004, etc., etc. In 2001, he wrote underscore, I'm not sure what that is, produced some of the songs for Clark Johnson's Boycott, HBO Films, yada, yada, yada. In 1996, he was commissioned to write an orchestral suite for the opening ceremonies of the Olympics, which is another really interesting thing. I didn't find this stuff out until last night. But where is that? Where's the piece about the two Emmy nominations? Oh, here we go. In 1993, Stephen received an Emmy nomination for an R&B song he wrote for I'll Fly Away, as well as a daytime Emmy nomination for his classical orchestral score for an episode of the animated series The Lion King's Timon and Pumbaa. It'll tell you that I'm not a Lion King fan. He's done string arrangements, which you just mentioned, for James Taylor, for Crosby, Stills, Nash, and he's currently working on a cartoon series. He has also worked on several films, made a couple of documentaries, and we'll talk about those. And I'm not going to read the piece about what schooling you went to, because we're going to talk about that. And now I'm going to take these glasses off and say, hey, Stephen, how are you?
I'll take mine off too then.
Good. A pleasure. How are you doing?
Doing great today.
Okay, so So my first question, probably almost always my first question is really, how'd you get to be Stephen Taylor the musician? Was it were you born were you born just like drawn to loving music? You couldn't wait to pick up an instrument. You saw it, you got turned on, et cetera, or did you grow into it in some other way? Was it, I remember meeting somebody who said, "Well, I really learned music because I wanted to pick up chicks in high school." It's like, all right, I guess that's a reason. So where do you fit? Where does music fit into your life from? Starting at what point?
Well, you pretty much answered. I'd say yes to all of the
Yes, to
above.
all of it. Yeah.
This will sound weird, but you know where it began? My fascination with pitch. My earliest memory of taking a pee and the sound of the pee hitting the water in the toilet, I heard notes in there.
Oh, wow. So that's an early age.
It was melodic to me. Yeah.
Yeah.
The idea of pouring one body of water into another.
Yeah.
And it does, when you do a Fourier analysis, you'll see that there are pitches that
Yes.
might dominate depending, right? And then also, having a piano in the house was a big thing, and a guitar. My mother was a musician, a very talented one, but not professional, church organist. But
Yeah.
she read music and played classical piano and a little bit of boogie woogie.
Where'd you grow up? Where'd you grow up?
Right here in LA, South
Central.
Central LA for the first 10 years. I went to an elementary school that was all black with 3 white kids. And then at 10 years old, moved to Silver Lake and was at an elementary school with all white kids and 3 black kids. So it was a really interesting.
And I guess that's called justice right there, right?
I don't know, or balance. I don't know. Being able to kind of be in the majority and then in the minority, was kind of interesting. I was not able to process it well at the time, like I was later, and realized, wow, this was really a wonderful way to grow up.
What caused the move? Like, why did you guys move?
My dad needed to be closer to work.
Right.
He was the first black principal, I think, in LA Unified School District.
Oh, wow.
Went on to become deputy superintendent eventually. And they named a school after him, about 6 years ago here.
Oh, well, great.
In Watts. And so,
So music from a really early age, or at least a fascination with sound.
yeah, and also at a time, this is important to bring up. This is at a time where what's changed since then is the way music is consumed. So when I grew up, and anyone in my age group, you would hear the music that your sister played, that your brother played, that your father liked, that your mother liked, because there was one record player.
Right.
Right. So you in my sense, my dad loved Clara Boyd and Mahalia Jackson. That was my earliest exposure to gospel. My sister liked Broadway, Sound of Music, and musicals. My mother liked classical music. My brother liked the blues and introduced me to Buddy Guy and these kind of influences. So that's not the case now. My granddaughter listens to music on headphones, and if you don't ask her what she's listening to, you'll never know what it is that's shaping her.
Right.
Because we're able to now consume it in a different way.
But music was a part of your life from an early age. So from when did you first start taking music lessons, or pick up an instrument or something?
Well, the piano, I would pick out themes I'd heard like on television. Like the first one was Romper Room. I used to watch Romper Room when I was 5, and pick out with one finger the melody for the theme song. Right. And I remember my mother telling a friend of hers that I had talent. I didn't even know what that word meant, but all I knew is that was fun to do. Mm-hmm. So then she had a rule with all 5 of her kids that they had to study a classical instrument for 4 years. That was non-negotiable. So pick the one that the public schools will offer you. And so the options were basically flute, clarinet, trumpet, or violin, I think.
What'd we pick?
Cello. I picked clarinet because I liked the way it looked. All those complex, squirrely keys.
Yeah, really cool, pretty cool. Yeah.
So, and she found me some really good teachers. Richard Lesser, who went on to play with, I think, the Tel Aviv Symphony, and Julian Spear, who was a very, very highly esteemed clarinet later with him. And I did my 4 years. We had to practice a minimum of a half hour a day, and I could not wait to go outside. I mean, I lived outdoors as a kid. I wanted to play baseball, and I couldn't wait until that half hour was up. but I liked playing, and I got decent on it and played in the junior high orchestra. And when the 4 years was up, I was out of there because I wanted to play guitar. And this is where I said you already answered my question.
Yeah, the
girls liked guitar players, right?
Nobody hung out with the clarinet player.
No way. They got no love, right?
Right.
But also, I liked the power that was being unleashed at the time by the electric guitar.
Yes.
That was driving the whole 60s revolution. Yeah. If anything, was that those open fifths, bam, and I wanted in. And so they didn't, she bought me a clarinet, but wouldn't buy me an electric guitar.
Really?
Because I would get involved with the kids who did drugs, which I did anyway.
Yes, right.
So
foiled again.
I actually had to get a paper route and get up at 5 a.m. on Sundays and throw these papers to save up $100 to buy an electric guitar, which I did, and then started getting in cover bands that did, Santana and Hendrix and that kind of stuff. And that took me through junior high and high school.
And
I didn't really know.
Did you take lessons? Were you taking guitar lessons, or no? You were learning because you picked up.
Until I was 16,
yeah.
I found a teacher, and he helped me learn some jazz stuff and learn a little bit of theory.
Yeah.
But I got to college, and I was very interested in philosophy.
Shutting a sound off, but so okay. Wait, you got to college. So tell us about that. So because you went to study music.
No, I didn't. I didn't at all. I just I got into UC Santa Cruz, Stanford, and Yale, and so I chose Stanford because I loved the campus and I just kind of liked the whole vibe of and it was far enough away from home that I could kind of be on my own.
They couldn't just drop in on you.
Yeah, exactly. I really drifted toward philosophy. I took a freshman year of Philosophy 101 taught by a brilliant teacher named John Mothershed. He was just the most objective, clear-minded thinker I'd ever met.
Mm-hmm.
And his ability to explain very complex concepts in an exciting way. Mm-hmm. And so I was really hooked. And so I took a bunch of philosophy classes, and then sophomore year made the mistake of taking a music theory course. It was just, because I wanted to learn the names of the chords, just, pretty pedestrian reason for taking it. Just, I was in a band, a jam band, and figured, well, it might help to know something. Well, that just lifted the veil. It was like that Wizard of Oz scene when the curtain comes back and it's like, is that all that is? Oh my God. And I remember the band I was in at one point, one of the bandmates said to me, like 3 months into my music theory class, he said, "What happened to you?" And I said, "What do you mean?" He says, "You got good." And I said, "Well, no, all it is like, I understand what I'm doing now and all the stuff that can be extrapolated from that, So then I said, oh my God, it presented what I call my first existential crisis, career-wise, which was, okay, how deep you want to get into this? So I did this.
I am really curious. You can always tell me cut it out, but I'm fascinated by that because it's, liking music, playing music, dabbling in music, and then making the decision to. That's where I'm going. That's where my professional life. That's where my livelihood. That's where I'm going to live is a very different thing.
It's a different question. Let me tell you my process then, because so essentially what I did was I created this little thought exercise, and I said, okay, I'm 19 at this point, so I'm thinking, all right, if you don't go into music, what else would you do? Well, I might teach philosophy or become a lawyer or I don't know. So he says, okay, take university professor. You're a university professor, and you work all day. And you're lecturing, and then when you come home, what are you going to do? And I said, oh, play guitar. I'm going to take out my guitar. Okay, now go another track. You're a lawyer. You spend all day in court, and you get home, what are you going to do? Oh, play guitar. That was the answer. Right. So I said, okay, wait, go the other way now. You're a musician. You've gigged all day, it's in the studio, and you come home, what are you going to do? Read law books? No. Play more guitar, right?
There you go.
So I thought, okay, I kind of asked my body, and said, well, what do you want? Well, I want to play. I want all of this stuff. I want in. I am insatiable, right? So it was like, okay, you're an idiot if you don't listen to this. I would probably have gotten physically ill had I tried to choose a different path. It was just screaming at me.
Mm-hmm.
So then I changed my major and had to then take larger academic loads in order to make up for the fact I had lost a year.
Mm-hmm.
But it goes back to my mother. I owe her because she made me learn how to read music. I couldn't have changed my major if I didn't know how to read music. They wouldn't have accepted me.
They wouldn't have accepted you in there.
No, I wouldn't have been able to, understand anything of what they were saying. And so that set me on that path. So up until then, I thought I just wanted to be a rock guitarist.
It's one of those things where many parents are saying, what are you going to do with that?
Oh, my dad, he got really concerned. My mother was okay because she kind of lived out career paths that she couldn't because of her generational thing.
Yeah.
And being a mother of 5. So she wanted to be a professional musician. And so I was going to live that out for her.
Right.
Which is great, actually,
Yeah.
My dad, on the other hand, wanted me to, he said, you ought to maybe go to plumbing school as a backup. He said, there'll always be a need for a plumber. And he was thinking like really practically.
Plumbers and fancy pastries. They're
That's
always
right.
in need.
Also, he wanted to have a free plumber in the family. Because plumbers, as we know, are very expensive.
Yeah, you don't really need a guitarist in the family.
No, right? Is the world really going to suffer for one less guitar player?
Yeah.
So yeah, in fact, when I had made that decision, I was very excited. I came home one summer and told my guitar teacher, and he tried to talk me out of it.
Really?
He said, oh, it's a brutal business and this, that, and the other. And he told me all these horror stories, and that just kind of egged me on even more.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't care.
And what is deciding to have a career in music look like the day after you graduate from college? Like, what jobs do you apply for? Right? Because this was not going to be that thing you did, you hope, after you came home from work. This was going to be the thing.
Yeah.
Right.
This is the thing. It looked in a way a lot like it still does now, in the sense that I feel I don't know enough.
What do you mean?
Well, okay, when I made that decision, I said, well, then you've got all this music history to learn, and how to read scores and how to conduct and how to orchestrate. And
so composing and that was part of the plan as soon as you started. It's like, that's what you wanted to do.
Yeah.
Create music, play music,
school,
create music.
Yeah, but creating it, I didn't realize until really toward the end of it, the study, that composing is really what lit my fire. I thought I could maybe have 2 careers, because at that time, not a lot of people were mixing pop music or rock music with classical. You kind of took one track or the other.
Right.
There wasn't a lot of that, not like now. I couldn't, that was my second existential crisis after that 4 years, was like, okay, now that you know about Igor Stravinsky and Hector Berlioz and Boulez and Berio, you kind of want to be them.
Yes.
But I also kind of want to be Hendrix.
Yeah.
So which way do I go? And I couldn't make up my mind. So I studied, I found a jazz guitar teacher who really taught me a lot, Bill Cordial. He owned a guitar shop on El Camino there in Palo Alto, and was just a magnificent teacher. And I learned chord solos from him and some things I realized early that my Stanford education had a lot of holes in it. The music department was very strong in music history, but not so much in other things. They were very strong. They had their own separate electronic music department, which I regret not taking advantage of. But I was so more concerned about just putting the basic elements of music together and understanding music history and the role different people played and what innovations were made when, and that kind of thing. So what solved my second existential crisis was I took a course here in LA. I had come home after the 4 years. And there was a course somebody was offering in music for film for composers. And the first thing the guy said was, well, I ended up studying with privately, Albert Harris. He was a wonderful teacher. And he said, well, you got to know how to, 1 week you've got to write like Ravel. The next week you have to write like Duke Ellington. And the next week you may have to write like Eric Clapton. So, and I said, wait. You get all of that? That's a bad thing? I said, and you get paid? How much you get paid? Oh, okay, done.
Sign me up.
This solves my problem because I could be all of those things.
Yes.
And have the greatest musicians in the world play it the next week. It's not like with the classical thing, you write something, and then you got to kind of find. I still have pieces that have never been performed, just because it's too much to put the whole thing together, and who finances it, and who copies it, and from the score to the parts, and this was like, wow, you get all this instant feedback. You can try things out, and so I studied with him, and then I realized that my classical composition needed a lot of guidance. I didn't have a direction, didn't have an identity. I was just throwing things at the paper. And I knew that I was just full of crap, and not really saying anything. So I sought out, I said, who's really a like rigid, severe, brutal teacher? And I found one, a Bulgarian composer who was a professor emeritus at UCLA named Henri Lazarof. He was a magnificent teacher. Yes. And he kicked my ass from here to Sepulveda. I mean, he really, really beat me up. And every time he did, it was like, he's right. I would write something and he would exit out. He says, you have no idea here. You're not working with an idea. You're working with raw gestures, or you're just working with a sound. That's not a musical idea, And so the first thing he gave me was the assignment to write a piece for solo flute. And I felt really stripped naked because it was just one instrument that can play one note at a time. And so no chords and all the stuff I was used to because of sort of relying on, and it was atonal. It had to be, so I learned from him over a 4-year period. By the way, he wouldn't allow you to cancel a lesson. He was that brutal. He said that the day you call and say, hey, I got a gig, can we do it next week? That's the day you quit, because I'm done with you. So he demanded, if he was going to spend his time nurturing your ability and helping to kind of, he didn't teach musicality, but he kind of did in a way, by gently pointing out. We would study other works sometimes, like the flute piece. We looked at Debussy's solo flute piece called Syrinx, and then one by Petrossi, and another one by Berio, I think. And you can see how they were, he would point out how they were putting things together. I needed to know how to speak that language.
So can you say more? Because for those of us who kind of understand, I sort of understand what you're saying, and yet at the same time, I couldn't give you an example. What does it mean? What does it mean that there's only gestures here? There's not an idea. What does an idea look like musically? What does that mean?
I'm not sure.
Can you say something about that?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I'm not sure if there's a hard definition for that. Yeah. But like, okay, for example, if you went to the piano and you took the back of your hand and went, that's a gesture. There's no music there yet, unless that's going to become a theme. And maybe you go to another instrument and you do that with it, and then they start to rhythmically interact. Maybe you can turn it into something. But if you go from that, and then the next thing I do is I pound with my forearm on the black keys. That's another gesture. That can be very dramatic if used in a context. But you're not really establishing a language yet. You're just going from a laundry list from one technique to another. And what you see in a lot of younger composers, sometimes Aaron Copland used to say, a young composer is a half of an idea. Right? It's sort of like, da.
Right.
Let's go somewhere else.
Right.
So, so in my case, it meant like, how do you?
Was it obvious to you when he would say something like that? Did you understand that it meant something at first?
Not right away. I would say, well, what's wrong with that? Like, I remember one of the first things I brought in had just a ton of notes. Oh, this is really virtuoso stuff. and it wasn't going anywhere, and there was no reason for any of them. Whereas he used to say, be stingy with your notes, be an aristocrat, be snobby, don't give them anything. You know, in other words, and so I learned just a simple thing like that. You're starting a piece with one note, then repeat the note, and then go up a half step and then back, and then maybe a minor third, and and you introduce now a little flourish, and then that flourish comes back over here in bar 10, and you know, now you're organically, you know what I mean? You have to kind of grok it.
Yes, no,
it's like, I see what he means.
Yeah,
it's like, stay with something, start something, stay with it, see where it takes you.
Right.
And even if you're just improvising against it, something that in that improv, you can say, oh, I want to take those trills. It was just going da, 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 ba, ya. Oh, okay. Da, 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 ba, ya. Oh, now you have some coherent. That's what I mean by music being a language that has no inherent meaning, but you can give it one by repeating things or by altering and varying. You create meaning and importance out of something that's completely abstract.
Okay, so you're drawn to, because some of it is career and some of it is like, this is going to be fun so I can get paid and do all this stuff and have fun, to film, scoring for film or music, TV or things like that. And then you take this turn, you know, that bio you sent me, it says, Stephen James Taylor has a unique musical identity. And I read that because reading is not my thing. I think we spoke about this before. It's like, you know, I'm dyslexic, so I still, like, you know, Stephen James Taylor is a unique musical identity. And so that's not what it said, but suddenly you took a turn into territory that was more, maybe not more, esoteric in a different way. Mm-hmm. So can you talk about that? Whether it, and I don't know if that's the turn in the direction of microtones.
Yeah, it is, because you're jumping ahead to my third existential crisis, which microtones solved.
Well, what was the second one? No,
well, the second one was, do I want to become a rock?
Yes, right.
A guitarist guy or a classical composer, and then the film thing answered that because I could get paid to do both. You know? Right. And so that's great. But in the meantime, that experimental part of myself, I consider myself, you know, at my core, an explorer.
I think, you know, I don't think there's any doubt. Reading
through, a brave one like Magellan or somebody. That,
and I'm going to put all this stuff in the descriptions, just so you know, in the video description. But it's so clear when you read this is that, well, yeah, you're an explorer. Like this is an array of things that, and I mean, one of the questions that comes up for me is that, you know, unless I'm mistaken, you know, a lot of times people are motivated by, they make a move in their lives based on where the dollars are.
Yeah.
And unless you're telling me, was there a, oh, I want to learn this because now this esoteric avant-garde stuff is, you know, there's a certain sort of, the money is there, or at least like it looks like it's drifting there, but it doesn't read like that. It reads like, no, this guy's looking for things because that's what he does. He's fascinated.
Looking not only in the unusual places, but in the common places. That has been something that emerged over time when I realized I was split into a couple of different pieces. So there's a part of me that the problem was solved by the fact I can be all these different stylistic things, or be in an arena where that's demanded of somebody in my position. But this experimental side was not getting fed. So when I studied with Lazarof for 4 years, it was being fed. But at the end of that 4 years, what happened was I wasn't too gaga about what I was writing. It was good. I look at it now and say, wow, it's really good. But
it's really good. I wonder who did that.
I'm not embarrassed. Yeah, I'm not embarrassed. But I looked down the road there and I didn't see anywhere I wanted to go. You know, it's like the people who are already really, really good at this, do you want to be them? Or in that in that crowd. It's like, no. And I didn't like the fact that it was, the stuff I was writing had so many notes in it. It seems like it needed a lot of notes to say what I wanted to say. And I said, okay, well, and the other trend that was happening at that time, so there was the whole free atonality thing, Budislavsky, Berio, people like that. Then there was Terry Riley and Steve Reich doing minimalism, where they would stay on one chord for an hour and vary it, you know, in ingenious ways rhythmically. But sonically, it was like really static, even though there was motion within it. I didn't necessarily like that either, because I thought simplistically, you know, if you're going to do that, you might as well put some drums under it and just rock the house, you know, which isn't a bad idea, you know.
Right.
People have done that.
Right.
But so the experimental part didn't want to go the direction it had been going for 4 years. The professional part was starting to kick in. So I was able to kind of throw my attention into that, but then I kind of wandered the desert in terms of the more exploratory part, you know. And I had heard about this thing called microtonality, and had heard about this guy named Erv Wilson, who was a kind of pioneer in that field. He had opened up new areas of it. One of his students, Craig Grady, was the one who kind of introduced me to Erv's work. And Erv Wilson was somebody who sort of had Craig describes it as the closest to a unified field theory of microtonality, or of tonality in general.
So could you give a you know, back of the envelope, shoot from the hip, a description to people who've never heard the term?
Isn't that fascinating that well-trained musicians know so little?
Right.
Let me, I have a little kind of a cell phone video. No, it's a little video I put together. Now think of these notes as the 12 inches on a ruler, all of equal length, spaced equally within the foot. What we call microtonality, or perhaps a better term would be metatonality, is merely the practice of creating a new ruler with new units of tonal measurement. For example, you could create a ruler with 31 equal divisions, or 53, or even 19 divisions with 2 different size inches, a long and a short. All of these are viable scales that give rise to a distinctive sonic world. Yeah.
So now we're back.
So the piano is the ruler, right?
Yes.
There are 12 equally spaced in terms of logarithmically, right? They're equally spaced notes within what's called an octave. And then do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, right? And then it starts again at do and goes up, right?
Yes.
So as soon as you erase that ruler and start using different math to generate a different number of notes per octave, you don't even need to settle for the octave. You can use another distance.
Okay.
Then it's up for grabs, and you're in the realm of what we call, some of us out here on the West Coast called transcendent tonality, commonly known as microtonality.
Got it. So when somebody's playing the guitar and they're, you know, they bend that string, are they hitting microtones?
Yes, they are. It's exactly what they're doing. Yeah. Especially the blues musicians. If you do an analysis, there's a guy in San Diego, Joe Monzo, who did an analysis of one of Robert Johnson, the famous blues guitar player, one of his recordings, and he found 6 different size minor thirds. So in other words, if he was in the key of C, he didn't just play E flat when he was bending. He was sometimes playing a little above E flat, a little bit below E flat, right? And that is part of what makes it sound, his sound the way it is that he's not playing the 12, that the microtones really are part of the whole sonic ecosystem, tonal ecosystem. And
it's and there's a notation, or there can be notation for that. Yeah.
Yeah, like, there's a lot of controversy over that. There's no standard way. One of the ways a lot of people settle on is how many cents sharp or flat of 12 of the normal piano. So you can say this is like a 16th tone higher, or, you know, and then you can give the exact number, like 14 cents, or
right.
100 cents being a half step, like C to C sharp is 100 cents. And our ear can hear at least 50 divisions of that. Really? It can be trained to.
And So so you hear or you heard about this, and you heard about this guy, and you have a story about why you were drawn to it, other than that it was like, woo, novel.
What I like to say is that after I discovered this field, I realized I could get my major chords back without having to go back to the 19th century to get them. Because some people were doing that. They were looking back to the 19th century when times were good tonally, right? And it sounds like it, you know, and you don't want to do that. It's almost like an unwritten thing with contemporary composers. You don't want to revisit the past unless you kind of reinvent it, you know, and give it a treatment that's, but you know, why would anyone want to write like Mozart? He closed the book on that. Nobody's going to write better music in that vein than Mozart. Mm-hmm. Don't even try, right? But you can build on that. You know, I have a piece that's going to be performed later this summer at Virginia Tech. There was a microtonal piece written in surround.
Oh yes.
And one of the movements was based on, inspired by Mozart's Symphony Number 40. But all of the intervals are a different size. So instead of da 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 da, it's like da 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 da. You know, they're intervals that you can't play on a conventional instrument. And then it goes off into a whole rhythmic thing that.
When folks who know music, quote whatever that means, who know music and know Mozart, hear that, will they know that that's what you're doing? Or will it sound so?
They may not. I played a little bit of it for Gustavo Dudamel, the conductor of the LA Phil. And he thought at the end of it, it sounded like Mahler. I mean, it didn't sound like Mahler. He said it had a Mahler-esque quality to it, that it kind of drew you off into these long arcs of development, you know. But they might, if you point it out to anyone, say, see, this is a lot like, you know, but then within 10 seconds, it goes somewhere completely different. It melts. Kind of the intervals get smaller and it turns into something that is very much not Mozart. But I love doing that. You know, I love going in and out of the known. To me, that's one of the challenges of the 21st century is how do we create and nourish the navigational pathways between different modes of thought and culture.
I had a question written down that felt like it's both exactly where you live and at the same time almost unfair. Do you think music can change the world?
That's a pretty big statement.
Yeah.
Yes and no. I think it can.
I don't mean it has to change it completely.
You know, not like, oh, I heard that song and now I don't want to kill anybody. You know, soldiers putting down their weapons.
Yes. Well, God, if you could do that. If you could do that.
Yeah, if I could find that chord that does that, blam, woo, okay, I'm done. You know, done. Drop the mic, right? But what I think it can do and at its best is soften the dough so that it can be maybe made into something else, because cultures tend to get hardened, right? They may start for the right reason. I listened to an interesting conversation between Barry Lopez, the writer, and a composer at UC San Diego, Schick, I think is his last name. And one of the things Barry Lopez said that I thought was really interesting was the arts, instead of being this sort of ancillary, also ran subject, it's not STEM, right?
Right.
It's technology, engineering, math. Right. It's this other thing that we tolerate, you know, because it's kind of cool to have around. He said it should be the foundation of our society. It should be the spiritual foundation of society.
Yeah, I mean, I know several artists who, and they are very convincing about that exactly, because I think it's, you know, there's all sorts of art that is, oh God, I don't, it's not fair for me to even use the word, but it's almost like it's decorative. It's it's like music, right? You know,
right.
And there's not, I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, right? Like, you know, geez, that's a pretty blank wall. We should put something up. Okay. But but the people who are really new ideas happen so often in, right?
Right.
The way people put things together. And
Right.
that can be art.
That's where we're screwed up, is we have no imagination when it comes to politics.
Yeah. Yeah.
Tons of it when it comes to, you know, choosing what kind of clay a sculptor wants to work with, or what kind of color palette a painter, or with a musician, what instrumentation, some unusual, anything goes, right? And there's a flexibility. Just because you wrote a piece for horn, piano, and viola doesn't mean you're the horn, piano, viola guy now.
Right.
Right. That's one of pieces within a body of work. Right. Mm-hmm. So you don't get that in politics. It's just like, okay, here's our platform and this is it. And we're suffering as a result of it.
Yeah.
So that's this is where I agree with that idea of having the arts be more, even if it's unofficial, you know, be the sort of spiritual foundation of a society, because my feeling certainly about music, and especially about trans-tonal music, is it facilitates and creates neuroplasticity.
You know, I was thinking,
I'm saying that like it's a fact, and I can't prove that. So
no, but
it's not proof.
But I think people have. I actually did, after our last conversation where that came up, and we both sort of said, well, geez, it has to be. Right. It has to be. I did some digging. And in fact, there's a lot of evidence that it absolutely is.
Music in general, or the arts, or
music in general, certainly learning music, right? Learning to play an instrument, learning to sing, learning has neurological effects. That's clear. And you know, I didn't dig deeply because it's not my territory, but I would bet that you and I would be right, that it absolutely does. And I think actually, you know, when I asked myself that question, like, could music change the world? It certainly is. I know that music has been an invitation in people's lives, right? It's been certain sorts of music. People look back to different eras of music, right? And in their own lives, and they can talk about how, because of this song, because of whether it was the combination of words, or because of this poem, or because of this painting, they were invited into some territory of thought, feeling, consideration, wondering. And, you know, it may not change. Not everybody put down their guns or their weapons at that time, but people can point to times where
it fertilizes the soil to where something can grow in it.
Yes.
You know who was my biggest spiritual influence with my senior year in high school? Father Zosima, a fictional character from Brothers Karamazov.
Oh, perfect.
A fictional character, someone who didn't exist. I said, I want to be like him in this way and that way and that way. And it was really an inspiration, and kind of set me on a kind of path of orientation in a weird way. Now, how is it that, think about that, a fictional character can have a real effect on a real person?
Well, right. I mean, think about like that. You know, it's like when somebody says, well, why would I want to read that? And I, by the way, was guilty of this. It's like, you know, this is fiction. It's like, but when you read, you know, Dostoevsky, it's like, well, the characters in Dostoevsky, they didn't exist. But would you say they're not real? They're so much more real than the real instructions of how to set up this computer.
Right.
Like, really? You know,
well, but you know, if we want to throw in a whole other wild angle on this, is look at the Everett parallel universes theory, right? Which has pretty much stood up well since it was introduced in the 50s, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, in that framework, at any given instance, there is a parallel universe that occurs.
Right.
And any instant in the past as well, possibilities. those characters in a novel, in a way, can be drawn. You can say they are drawn from a parallel universe where they did exist.
Where they did exist, where they do exist.
Where they do exist. They continue to exist.
Yeah.
Right?
But they're actually having this conversation.
That's right. They're having this conversation about us. You know? But the thing is, what if then the arts, or in this case, novel writing, is a form of interdimensional travel?
Right.
I believe that's the case with music sometimes, but more generally with arts, especially the temporal arts. And here's where we'll loop back to your question about can music change the world. You got to be really, really careful. There's something I in my vocabulary I call borrowing from Carlos Castaneda's distinction of tonal and nagual. Tonal he describes as anything, which what the Buddhists might call the 10,000 things. Anything that can be talked about, characterized in words, conceptualized, including God. God exists on top of the table. Underneath the table is the nagual. Those are the things that are ineffable. They are direct experience. I consider music a nagual type experience, because when you're really enraptured in a piece of music, either as a participant or a listener, there's no distinction. There's no you.
Right.
As soon as you're aware of, wow, look at me, then you're back on the top again, because, right? So I call the top of the table the concept of God, and under the table, the nagual, the experience of God. Mm-hmm. I don't like using that God word because it's so loaded with historical meaning and charge. And I think there's a lot of false certainty around that word.
Sure.
But I like using it in this context because it kind of leavens it a little bit, kind of loosens it up, because the arts are down underneath here. You can't explain in words what these things are. You can talk about them, but talking about something is not the same as actually experiencing it.
Right. Right. Well, and in an odd sort of way.
And by the way, God doesn't exist under the table.
Right. No, exactly.
God does not include God.
Right. Right.
In my estimation. Right?
No, I get it. I totally get it.
But it's the top of the table where we get all in trouble.
Tell me about
this. My God is this. My God is that. And that's where I was going. So if you say, can arts change the world? It depends on how you talk about art, because then you get into these factions like you were talking about with your faculty. It'll just do what it does. It becomes like religion, where you have all these denominations and different religions. They all think they kind of have the answer.
Yeah.
It means probably none of them do.
That's probably right. Whatever word gets used to speak about it, under the table, it is so clearly a human experience to, sometimes referred to as awe, and sometimes as spirituality, and sometimes all that stuff. But, if you stay in the room talking to people long enough, everybody's had a taste of it.
That's right.
But everybody's had a taste of it. So there's it's a there.
It's a there.
Yeah.
Without a question,
Yeah.
And it is, and even talking about it, you almost have to have a sign language or some sort of thing.
Right. I like that. I like the metaphor of on top of the table, but underneath that. Yeah.
And you need both. I mean, Don Juan said we communicate on top of the table. It's a miracle that whole thing exists, Yes. But against all of that, there's this whole idea also of the reflexive universe. My wife always says that life is set up in a reflexive fashion, like the guy with the sunglasses that have mirrors.
Yes.
If you stare into his eyes, you see yourself.
Yes.
And life is that guy, except he's got mirrors everywhere. Any part of it you look at, you see yourself, right? So this is where I think I want to, tie it in with one of your previous guests who talked about astrology. There's a big misunderstanding amongst.
Oh, you listened to that, Jennifer?
I did. It was wonderful. Yeah. And the same with Michael Abels, my esteemed colleague, Gary David, of course. And everybody's on, I think, kind of on the same page with a lot of this stuff. But in terms of astrology, the scientific community and people who are very certain about the top of the table being everything.
Yes, right.
they poo-poo astrology because they think people are conflating it with astronomy. And they're just borrowing the same numbers. So in astrology, the way I say it is this is what people don't get. Astrology is poetry. Astronomy is prose.
Yes. Well,
right. So with astrology, it's reflective of something inside you. Astronomy is the study of those things outside you, way outside.
Yes. Which, you know,
when you valid, right? I mean, who hasn't learned something from a poem? It's not the same as learning STEM.
No.
Or some math formula or some calculus, you know, differential crap. You know.
What's interesting to me is that when you stare out there, when you stare into the night sky long enough, and think far enough into what's the most recent star, 28 billion light years away, when you stare there long enough, you end up back at yourself. It's like
there's the reflexive universe again, right?
Yes.
Arthur Young, I think, wrote a great book called The Reflexive Universe. You have it there?
Something was beeping, and I was like, "What the hell's that?" So it was.
Yeah, that's a great thought there. The further you look out, the more it draws you in.
I mean, I think this is everybody's experience, but I love thinking that my experience is everybody's experience. But if, you know, the further out you consider as the numbers get bigger and bigger, and, you know, and it becomes so overwhelming, you end up back here in that, and you start over again.
Right.
It's interesting, and yet, you know, I think that error, I'm going to call it an error. I'm going to be bold and call it an error that people make, that you know, there are people who don't believe in astrology for all sorts of scientific reasons, and there are people who absolutely believe in astrology for almost just as rigid reasons. And neither of them seems to, and that's what I loved about the conversation I had with Jennifer, is that she was able to put it in a way that embraced it fully without pinning it down.
Yeah, that's what I liked about a lot of what she had to say. She seemed to have a light touch on things.
Yes.
You know what I mean? As opposed to, avoid that. That's woo. You know?
Right.
No, there's actually some stuff in there to be extracted that's incredibly solid.
Yes.
But not in a way that science would measure.
Right.
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 And so there's a way to do it without having to buy the whole farm.
Yes.
Right.
It's interesting, and I think you are that. Like, it seems to me that a person that can do that needs to have a lot of faith in themselves, in that faith that they're onto something. And it strikes me that you in this sort of, you immersed yourself in this, you immersed yourself in music, and then you immersed yourself in this slice of music that is in some ways extra expansive, right? That I'm not going to be stuck with those 12 tones. Right. There's a universe out there,
right?
That there's a certain sort of trust that there's a there, and you know, and I think, and I'm hoping there's a succinct way of listing some of the things, pointing people to in the notes that we have for when we put up the video, for some of the compositions you've made, because it's one thing to talk about. Well, I understood in principle, right? Oh, microtones, sure. Space between the pianos, right? I mean, I picked up a guitar years ago and I bent the string, and
right.
I understood there were things between those tones. But
there's nothing God-given about those tones.
No, right. But to
That's
see to experience what you've created with microtones, right? And with that sort of dances on the edge of there's nothing here and then there is. It's almost like when you, I don't know if you've ever seen a water spout or a tornado in formation where there's nothing there. And then you see us like, wait, what is that? And then this thing comes into a coherent expression.
Right.
And then sometimes goes away just as mysteriously as it appeared. It's an incredible, and that's why I want to put those things up on this thing, is that people should experience that, because I mean, some of it is magical and beautiful and on the edge of, I might be going crazy here, and now I'm not. And it's a wonderful, for me, it's a wonderful dance on the edge of, it's almost like riding a bicycle horizontally. Why am I not falling over? I'm not. I seem to be able to be riding this bicycle in this really weird way. So it's quite something. And can it change the world? Maybe. I mean, maybe.
Well, in that maybe it can. There are things you can work out. I mean, composition is kind of like a life laboratory for me. It's sort of like and for me, I don't even like the word spiritual, because I don't like to bifurcate life. I think life is one thing. It's under the table, and you can cut it into a bunch of pieces on top of the table and call it different things: spiritual, professional. But to me, everything it's one thing. And the more in my own language and the way that I talk to myself that I don't make those distinctions, I find it helpful. So I kind of work through a lot of times things that are going on in my life in compositional practice. Don't necessarily do it consciously, but a lot of times after the fact, I said, "Ooh, what you were going through plays out in that." In fact, I have one thing I could play you later that I realized years after what was going on in my life and why that composition went that particular way. But in a way, it's a safe place to play and experiment. Again, one of the reasons why political systems are so rigid is that they're so hard to change. Whereas you could write something musically and say, I don't really like that chord, let's make another one, and same with the sculptor. If the clay is still wet, anything goes. And that's a safe place to model things, not model them scientifically, like with a one-to-one correspondence. But that thing you were saying about the tornado, it shows up and then it can just go away. Music moves like that too. You can make something brew underneath the surface. That Shelley and the basses are doing a tremolando, and you feel it starting to rise. That's a lot like what can happen in nature with weather patterns or what have you. But it's in its own universe. But it shares some of the dynamic properties of the world we live in.
This is a non sequitur. Do you still ever gig? Like, do you go play someplace with other people?
Almost never. I kind of miss it.
Yeah, I'll bet.
But all of this technology has kind of screwed up that for me. Just because I can play something, listen back, and fix the parts that aren't perfect. That's really messed me up. I've come to kind of depend on that modality. Whereas if you're in a jazz group, it all goes.
It's all someplace
there in the moment. Yes. I miss that excitement.
Yeah,
I used to, but it's been decades actually since I've actually had a band, and
right.
Every now and then I'll sit in with somebody.
You've also designed, built, or at least had built instruments. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there was something. Don't ask me to find it, because that's the hard thing for me to do. But it was some. Was it a keyboard that had? Keyboard is the wrong. It's like a keyboard. No.
Yeah, a keyboard.
810. An 810 key microtonal keyboard.
Right. That was designed by Erv Wilson, built by Harvey Starr of Star Labs in San Diego. And I kind of helped in the process of developing it.
That's a playable instrument?
It's a playable instrument. It's remarkable what it opens up in your brain, because the interfaces are very important to me, because they bring out different ideas. So if you have a set of mallets, right, and you're hitting something, with one of these, that generates one kind of idea. If you're playing like this, it's different. If you're playing along a piano, which is left to right, there are certain limitations to that. But with this hexagonal keyboard, you can play along any vector, like 12 different vectors that you could go off in that direction by having hexagonal keys as opposed to rectangular ones.
So do they look like hexagonal, like buttons?
Well, here, let me share screen again. I'll show you
please.
A quick little cell phone comparison. Okay, on the piano, you have do, re, mi. And if you want a note between do and re, there's only one choice, C sharp here, the black key. But on this keyboard over here, it can be set up so you get that, but you also get 18 other notes between do and re. I'll show you. You have do, re. Yes, it is playable, and you can configure it to whatever you want. The keyboard itself doesn't make any sound; it's just a controller.
Yeah.
And you go into the computer and say, I want that to be a piano sound, and I'm going to tune it up to 108 notes an octave, or 31 notes an octave, or 13 notes per octave, however you want to configure it. There's another piece I'll put on the list called Co-Prime Colors, where I set up the keys to match a geometric array of numerical operations that looks like a triangle. So you can actually know what you're playing when you play it, and its mathematical relationship to the previous note. So that's what I mean by interface really matters, because certain ideas come out of what's now possible.
Yes.
It'll bring with it other limitations.
Yeah.
But it'll open up other things you would have never thought of in the regular keyboard. So a piano now suddenly can sound like something completely different, not only because of the greater note choice, but the interface is not demanding that you play it in the way that traditional piano music is played.
So let me ask you, well, I don't know if this is I was about to say, let me ask you a practical question, but it's not really practical. But is there demand for this? And is there, I recognize that it's a very 20th century term, demand, like looking for, like, is there a demand for this, and is there a way of generating a demand for this? And do you care about that?
Those are all great questions. Are you speaking as an economist? When you say demand,
I'm
like
speaking
supply and
as,
demand.
Well, that's, I mean, there's a way in which, yes, that's true. So Disney put a microtonal composition in the rotation there.
Yeah, let me tell you a story.
They didn't say, or they didn't come knocking on your door, this is a question really, and say, hey, you got any microtonal stuff for us, or did they?
Kind of.
Wow.
Because of the relationships I had with people at Disney Imagineering who knew I had this.
Yes.
And they wanted in this cantina section to have a robot DJ who plays hits from around the galaxy, pop music hits, from different galaxies, right?
Phenomenal.
So they thought, well, you've done some unusual stuff.
I know a guy who lives in outer space.
So they brought me in and I said, well, what are you thinking? And they played me about a dozen different pieces. John Williams' original, right?
Yeah.
And then John Powell had done some interesting things, but all of them were in 12.
Yes.
The conventional. And I said, okay, can I play you something now? And I played them the first cut on my album, Embrace It All. And within 6 seconds, they said, that, yeah. And I said, well, no, let me play you some other stuff. And then they go, that too.
That too.
Yeah,
that.
Yeah. And so microtonality or transcendent tonality was a that.
Yes.
So there was a demand in that case. And sure enough, it did sound like, it ended up being like kind of a hip hop world music thing where the guys who did the voices for Star Wars of the Wookiees, and they wrote a rap to go over it.
Oh, wow.
That's in a language that's made up,
Oh, wow.
So that would be the, not the first time that it was actually a demand, but there is one that will be created eventually, because what I've been doing slowly over the last 30 years or so is, at first I would sneak it into things. And then I got to where now I start all projects with a microtonal palette. And then I say, can I talk myself out of it? Usually I can. Usually I can talk myself out of it and say, look, the main thing is it serving the picture? And if it's not serving the picture, then it's serving an agenda and it has to go. But if it's serving the picture, which more often than not, it's like, ooh, this would be really, really interesting. The project I'm doing right now is for Mattel, which is just got released on
the toy company, I mean?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It just got released on. Hold on a second, the phone's ringing.
No, it's all right. I know that experience.
Yeah, but problem is when it's a FaceTime call, it rings everywhere.
Everywhere. I was about to say, right? And everything goes off.
I'm going to let it just ring.
Yeah, let's do its thing.
I don't want to hit.
Who knows? There may be a musical. My fantasy is to have a day and a time when everyone in the world has their ringtone go off at the same time, no matter what it is.
It's a really, really good idea. It's a really good idea, especially if they have the same ringtone, or they fill out a chord. Like yours will be C, mine will be E.
Got it.
Kind of like when you hold up your Bic at the end of a concert.
Yeah, right, exactly.
There should be. See, things like that would really matter. Right?
And everybody would put down their weapons and pick up
and hold up their cigarette lighters. Everyone's going to have a cell phone by then, right?
Yes, of course. I think they do now.
Right, of course. But yeah, so I was saying, so the project I'm working right now is a kids animated project based on Barbie dolls, right? It's called Barbie It Takes Two, and there's a black Barbie and a white Barbie, one from Brooklyn, one from Malibu, and they go on adventures in New York City. So it's very lighthearted and fun, and there's a little bit of pratfall type things in it where they'll slip and fall and catch the cake that they were carrying.
Yes.
For that kind of thing, it's perfect.
It's perfect, right?
It's perfect.
Yeah.
For something that's supposed to be tender or supposed to be stylistic, like they're on the beach in Hawaii or in the Bahamas or something like that, that you might do something that's more Bahama-like,
yes.
Whatever that means musically.
Yeah.
But for things where there are moments of comic instability, I'm finding it works absolutely wonderful to have things all set up and ready to go and say, okay, now I'm going to use this different vocabulary just for that 13 seconds. And so that's more or less how my workflow is working right now. I just have everything out, all the guns are loaded, and whichever one you want, bam, grab it. Be it a conventional one or be it a guitar with 31 frets instead of 12.
And we spoke briefly about this, and I've been thinking about it ever since our conversation, our pre-conversation.
Yeah.
So the world you have worked in, as certainly when it comes to scoring something, is the picture comes first, or the story comes first, or the scene comes first, and the music is intended to adhere to it, add to it, enhance it, etc. And the reverse of that seems fascinating, right?
Well, it's important, I find, to go into it knowing what it is your tool can do, right? Like if you're holding an axe, you can hammer in a nail with it, but it's probably better for chopping down a tree, right? With music in a film, what you're holding is the ability to change the meaning of the scene.
Yes.
That's a powerful thing.
Right.
You can either change it, enhance it, or as I often say, frame it emotionally.
But not necessarily what the director wants, right? I mean, because the director's got some idea of what this scene, what he or she wants the scene to be, right. And if you have to somehow remain true to that, or change the director's mind.
Yeah, it depends on the director. Some better just go with what, and your job, I often consider myself kind of a detective in these situations where I will cross-examine the director saying, I want to make sure I understand what you're after. And the question I always ask is, what do you want people to feel at the end of this scene, or at the end of this movie, or during this, while this is happening? And that answer can be very, very indicative of the direction of the score. Now, other directors will say, you come up with something. The ones that really are trusting. Yeah. And they say, okay, well, here's what I think it should be. And they might say, yeah, that's a good idea. I mean, usually if I have a different idea than what the director has, I rarely win. Yeah. I don't think I've ever won one of those discussions ever.
Have you ever done a project, not necessarily with somebody else's film, but have you ever done a project where it starts from the project, it starts from the music, and you've turned it into something that is, where the picture or whatever is the other manifestation sort of comes.
Well, yes, in the 90s, when I was doing a lot of Disney animated series, there would be these segments where they would want me to write something and they would animate to it. So that wasn't the beginning of the project. And I would always, whenever I got the animation back months later, would always change the music a little bit, because they would add little things. Oh, it'd be funny to catch that eye blink with a little xylophone or something like that. But as far as like from the very beginning, there's a film I made with a friend of mine, Aaron Rappaport, called I Am Here. It's on YouTube. You can put a link to it. And that began with the music. It was music I gave to Aaron. I said, Aaron, he's a photographer and a cameraman. I said, can you shoot something that goes with this? So, but what if we had a bunch of dancers above the ocean, and so we shot this one day of these dancers just dancing to this sort of ambient type music. And then the idea emerged, well, wait a minute, what if the dancer is dreaming this and she's actually on a spaceship? That was a mistake to say, good idea, because then we ended up renting a spaceship set. And it turned into this, and the whole story got written around that. So I wrote the music first, because what happens is it's at a time in the future when spacecraft are sentient. They have feelings and the ability to use language, and they can talk and interact with the pilot. And in this particular society, pilots have to go on a vision quest, and some don't come back. And the vision quest tests their verve, right? And how do you handle when things go wrong? Right. So things go wrong, and this pilot ends up just dancing, because there was nothing else to do. The energy had to go somewhere, and she's trapped in this thing, and she just dances like crazy. And that's what and ends up kind of transcending the whole thing at the end. So that story all emerged from the music first. All the music she dances to was already there.
Oh, wow.
And that was really, really fun to be, I edited the thing as well. So it was great to be able to say, oh, you know, it'd be great if the music had another layer to it right here, boom. Oh, it'd be great to use that shot of her putting on the makeup, you know, it's a rare thing to be able to score something, write something, edit it, all in the same organic thing. I found that it activated parts of the brain at the same time. It was physically an experience I'd never had before. Everything lit up. And because usually I'm just on one, you know, doing one part of, you know, of the process. So
I have two, they're paired questions that just occurred to me that I'm not sure either of one of them is fair.
Okay.
Like, are you longing to do a particular project that, you know, geez, I wish I could? What's that? What is that? Can you say something?
Well, with all of these existential crises, what I've been trying to move toward is the unification of all of them, to where my film music and concert music and the stuff I write on my own, pop type things, microtonal, all one thing, all in one venue. So whatever that would look like. Also, film-wise, there's certain kinds of films I would like to get back to. I would like to do all transcendent tonality score. So be it a horror film or be it a science fiction, that would be most desirable. Or something sort of supernatural. Yeah. But something that would cover the full range of emotions, even a war movie, you know. I would love to have a big budget to have the ability to reach into a big orchestra at the same time, use all of these instruments I have here that don't really transport well. And,
I'll bet.
And you can't just bring in a player to play 31 tones per octave unless they've had some experience with it, or you can find a way to do it. But I would like to be able to tap, you know, orchestral and pop musicians and vocalists, and just tie everything together, right? So yeah, any kind of a thing that would enable me to use my full skill set in one project. I don't care if it's a classical piece or a film project or a record project. Because these things all scream at me. It's kind of like having a harem. You know,
they're calling. They
call. Like I walk by the marimba on the way out, and it's like, you never wrote anything for me yet. You know, it's like, okay, I did. I wrote you that little thing.
Oh, that.
That is. I know. You're sitting there. You know.
Yeah, but the xylophone you write for all the time.
Yeah, right. So it is right on the edge of insanity, all of this.
But if this were the only time we could ever speak, what would you be upset that we didn't speak about?
Oh, I didn't mention the other mentor of mine, Ben Gurule. So yeah, I don't.
Oh yes.
I don't want to go down that rabbit hole.
Reminiscent of the thing hanging behind you, and
yes.
Yeah.
That here, which here I'll bring it down. Oh, I have it chained up there.
Yeah.
But I'll just briefly give an outline of that. I don't want to go into details because he deserves his own show. The subject is so deep.
And deep and challenging. I watched the films you pointed at.
Which, by the way, Jesus Trevino and I are creating a website that will be out probably sooner than later, within the next few months, that will have those films on it that explain his work and what his models. But just to give people a little bit of background, Ben Gurule was this graphic designer who, in the late 60s and early 70s, stumbled upon a previously unknown system of order in 3 dimensions. He found a way to create the platonic solids at, say, something like this, which is an octahedron. he found out a way to do it with waves. So this is an octahedron too, but it's made out of 4 of these. That's it. They're waves. So he quickly realized, oh my God, this is relevant to what's happening at the bottom of creation, all the way down to the elementary particle level. Is what if what we think is an atom is actually a sort of system of what did he call it? He called it networks of occurrence. What if they were verbs, not nouns? The atom is waves like this, that if they come in at the right angle, they loop around on each other. Think of a photon wiggling through space. What if it was an Ouroboros? What if that wiggling snake of a photon ate its own tail?
Right.
It would become a ring. If those rings bind with other rings, they won't come apart if their frequency is the same and their phase angles are right. They will self-contain, right? So he discovered all this, that a way that matter energy is entangled by waves to form matter. So we ran this by Jeffrey Chu, the late Jeffrey Chu, who was one of the kind of architects of, he laid the groundwork. He was one of the people that laid the groundwork for string theory, professor emeritus at UC Berkeley. And we caught him about a year before he died. He was 96 at the time, very lucid. And he said, I resonate with all of this. He says, he said it kind of built on his previous work, which is what Ben Gurule had always thought. Nobody ever took Ben seriously enough because he was a graphic designer.
I was about to say, did you say he was a graphic designer?
Graphic designer. He had no scientific background.
So this was not something he studied. This was something
he stumbled on. And then he studied quantum mechanics and started saying, oh my God, look at the properties. You know, like even look at this. It's a little, pyramid shape, octahedron. But if you look at it closely, the faces have this one in particular is right-handed because it goes down, down, down. Even the points, the vertices have chirality. They spin one way or the other.
Right.
That is a byproduct of the way that they're woven out of these. So when you use waves, what's called pleated polyhedra, when you use waves to form these figures, they have electroactive properties. They have spin. So it's a completely new approach to the concept of spin, which physicists are quite familiar with. There's electron spin, there's, there's all these different kinds of spin, angular momentum, all this. So basically the story of Ben Gurule is a graphic designer who was an accidental visionary. That's what we're calling him on the website. He stumbled upon this body of knowledge. He was so sure that someone else discovered this system that he tried to patent it. And he, not so that he could protect it as IP, intellectual property, but just because so that he could be told no. And who else did it? Well, it took the patent office 4 years and they gave him the patent. They said, nobody's done this. Nobody has stumbled on this. So then he knew he was onto something. So he wrote to Buckminster Fuller and actually had a short meeting with him. And Fuller wanted to have him write a chapter of his next book.
Oh, well.
That never happened, but Fuller was blown away by this, as was Isaac Asimov. And we have the letters from all these different people he wrote to. But
you say he's passed away?
He passed away in 2014. And so that's why Jesus Trevino, who's a retired director, did a lot of the Star Trek episodes and things like that. We made these 3 films about his work, and we're going to put them up on a website along with, he wrote 2 books that he never published. So we may put some of that up. And that explains this whole new approach to understanding matter at its most elementary state in a way that's wave-based. That's what I find interesting as a musician, is that we deal with these waves. This is called the sawtooth wave. Synthesizers make, and by the way, if you change the waveform to make it more round, it turns into a different kind of polyhedra.
Oh, that's so interesting.
So that was the thing in the films that we brought up, like if you take those waves and change the waveform or change the frequency or change the amplitude, you end up with completely different platonic solids, these weird kind of incremental ones. So it's a new spin on matter, and it's based in waves, which is what sound is, right? So matter coming from waves out of nothing without any adult supervision. This has fascinated me, right? And I curse Ben Gurule because he warned me. He said, this stuff will get you by the throat and it won't let go. And he was right about that. So this is something that also in an average day, if I have a minute, I'll ponder these koans, as to how these things are constructed. I built a lot of them myself, and they're puzzles. They are three-dimensional puzzles. In fact, he even started a business in the early 70s called Puzzle Works, in which he sold things like this. He would give you a box of these. And
with instructions for how to put them together.
Yeah, and by the way, it's a very interesting neurological exercise building his puzzles.
I'll bet.
Even the 5 rings there, they're woven together, and there's one way to do it right. If you get it wrong, they'll all fall apart. But when they come together, they can't be broken. If those were made out of indestructible rings,
right,
the rings could never come apart. It would take the power of an atom bomb. That's what an atom bomb is.
Right.
It's breaking the things apart, right? So,
the forces holding.
But in the building of them, something happens in your brain where you can't make instructions for those that go step A, step B, step C, step D. When you get to step D, they all have to be woven at the same moment. It's hard to describe. You almost need 6 hands. In fact, I cheated to do a lot of these things. I would bolt them down to get an extra pair of hands. But while this one's weaving under that one has to weave over this one. But it's not there yet. So they all have to happen at the same time.
It sounds like he probably should have started IKEA, because that's what they do.
Yeah. That's
like, wait a minute, this can't be built.
This can't be. And by the way, I don't have that number 2X, whatever, with the hexagonal. I don't have that. Yeah. Yeah, that's funny. But yeah, life at the bottom of creation might be an IKEA.
Yeah.
Piece of furniture that we're all living in.
That's what's living under the table.
All those Swedes.
Well, this may be the pause of our first conversation. So, well, thank you, Stephen.
Absolute pleasure, David. Always great talking to you, and all of you.
Fun.
Incredibly free form questions and.
Well, and it's also, and I think it's actually. I'm always inspired by, and I think the world. I mean, sort of having grown up in education. I'm not sure I grew up in education, but watching what opens young people's eyes. One of the things that has always been really important, and I used to see it when I would take kids to some place where they bumped into people who looked like their brothers and sisters and mothers and fathers and aunts and uncles who had made incredibly different life choices, right? And that in and of itself was such an education for young people. And I think, sort of extrapolating to the rest of the world, I think one of the, you talked about it before, it's like, musician, you fit in a category, and what's clear from our conversations, what's clear from our conversations is that, that category of musician doesn't apply. I mean, we could sort of force somebody into it. I guess we could force you into it, but that's not your lived experience, nor is it. And so that in and of itself, I think, is so valuable. And so I'm so grateful for that conversation.
Thank you, David. The weird thing is, I don't feel I'm an expert on anything.
Yeah.
Even in my field.
Yes.
No, I could know a lot more. There are people that know a lot more.
Yeah.
About the history of it and the technology of it,
Sure.
the psychology.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's always more. I mean, that's what Google's for, right?
Yeah,
But,
well, yeah.
but that's different from, you know, knowledge is, the stacking up of knowledge is one thing, but the ability to see and create different, overlapping, interconnecting wavicles of experience is something.
Yeah, it tangentially reminds me of the quote from Alvin Toffler, where he says the illiterate of the 21st century won't be those who can't read and write, but those who can't learn, unlearn, and relearn.
Right.
And the emphasis on the learning dynamic, I think, is what I find of tantamount importance moving forward as a society.
Yes.
How do we learn? What do we learn? What's healthy learning? What's unhealthy learning?
Right.
All that David Bolton stuff.
I was going to say.
So important.
So much so. So much so. Yeah. Well, thank you, Stephen. I really appreciate that you've spent this time. And
I appreciate being here, David. I appreciate everything about you.
Well, we'll do this. I think we'll do this again sometime.
Okay.